The morning began the way most of Amanya's mornings did, not with urgency, but with restraint. The alarm rang at 6. Three soft chimes, each one gentle enough that it never startled her awake. She had chosen that tone deliberately months ago. Loud alarms felt too demanding, too forceful. This one was almost apologetic, as though it were asking permission to interrupt her sleep. She silenced it before the third chime had fully faded, and the room settled back into stillness. For a moment she lay beneath the duvet, watching pale light seep through the cream curtains. Outside, dawn was already unfolding over the city, a rooster crowing with unwavering confidence, a motorcycle rumbling past, a vegetable seller's voice rising and falling like a familiar melody. Life had already begun, Amanya lingered, not because she disliked mornings, but because there was something comforting about those few quiet minutes before the world expected anything from her. Eventually, she swung her feet onto the cool tiled floor. The chill crept into her skin, and she welcomed it. It reminded her she was awake. Her apartment was modest but immaculate. Every book sat squarely on its shelf. Every mug faced the same direction. The peace lily by the window leaned toward the sunlight, its white blossoms bright against glossy leaves. People often complimented her home. "It's so peaceful," they'd say. It was, almost too peaceful. Sometimes she wondered whether the silence reflected who she was, or whether, over the years, she had simply been shaped by it. She made tea the way she always did. Water first, 2 tea bags, a slice of fresh ginger, a spoonful of honey, no sugar. She wrapped both hands around the mug before the first sip. It tasted familiar, predictable, safe, much like the life she had carefully built. At 34, Amanya had become an expert at reliability. She paid her bills early. She never missed deadlines. She remembered birthdays, answered emails politely, volunteered when colleagues needed help, returned borrowed books in better condition than she'd received them. People trusted her. People appreciated her. People depended on her. But appreciation and recognition, she had learned, were not the same thing. Dependable people often became part of the furniture, always present, rarely noticed. The office occupied the 7th floor of a glass building overlooking the city. Large windows framed the skyline. The reception smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. Security guards greeted employees by name. "Good morning, Amanya." "Morning, Grace." A cleaner pushing a trolley paused. "Morning." "Good morning." The security officer nodded. She nodded back. Small kindnesses, invisible rituals that made the building feel almost human. At her desk, she set down her bag, switched on her computer, straightened the files already aligned beside her keyboard, and opened her planner. She liked writing tasks by hand before typing them into her calendar. Ink made responsibilities feel tangible. By 8:30, she was already working, while colleagues drifted in with takeaway coffee and stories from the night before. Weekend trips, football, politics, family gossip. She smiled whenever someone caught her eye, but mostly she listened. Listening had become one of her greatest talents. Perhaps too great. At 10, everyone gathered in the conference room for the weekly strategy meeting. Sunlight reflected off the polished table. Laptops opened, pens clicked, coffee cups settled onto coasters. Their manager reviewed quarterly performance, sales trends, client satisfaction, budget projections, then asked the question everyone had anticipated. "Any ideas for improving client engagement?" Silence, only a few seconds. But in meetings, a few seconds could decide who got remembered. Amanya had an idea. Not just an idea, a complete strategy, thought through on her commute, steps already outlined in her head. She inhaled quietly. Now. Speak now, before someone else. "I think we should redesign the client feedback process." Everyone turned toward Daniel. He continued confidently, and halfway through his explanation, Amanya recognized it. Almost exactly what she had planned to say. Not identical, just similar enough. Heads nodded. The manager smiled. "Excellent suggestion." Amanya lowered her eyes to her notebook and wrote nothing. Only small circles in the margin, round and round. She hadn't lost her idea. She had lost the moment. Again. It wasn't the first time, or the second. Ideas arrived easily. Speaking them aloud did not. There was always one last hesitation, One last question. What if it isn't good enough? What if someone's already thought of it? What if I'm wrong? And by the time she finished negotiating with herself, someone else had already spoken. At lunch, conversation turned to leadership. The department director was retiring. A new team lead would soon be appointed. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I've already submitted my expression of interest. Someone laughed. I knew you would. You've got a good chance, another added. More names entered the discussion. Who had influence? Who had visibility? Who presented well? Who networked? Who spoke with confidence? No one mentioned Amanya. Neither did she. The truth was almost embarrassing. She wanted the position. Not for the title, not the salary, because she knew she could do it well. Better, maybe, than several of the names already being floated. She understood every workflow. She mentored junior staff, unofficially. Clients requested her by name. When problems emerged, managers quietly asked for her help. Yet the moment leadership entered the conversation, she removed herself from it before anyone else could. The habit had become automatic, like blinking. That afternoon, an email arrived. Leadership applications open. The cursor blinked patiently while she read. Qualifications, leadership experience, strategic planning, communication, project management. Nearly every requirement described the work she was already doing, unofficially without the title, without the recognition, without the confidence to claim it. She opened a blank document and typed, application for team lead position, then stopped. Read the words, deleted them. Closed the document. Not today. Maybe tomorrow. The afternoon passed in emails, reports, calls, client meetings. One client told her, I always ask for you because you solve problems without making anyone feel foolish. Thank you, she said, smiling. Inside, a different thought surfaced. If I'm capable enough to solve everyone's problems, why don't I believe I'm capable of leading them? The question outlasted the call. Rain began just before 5, striking the windows in fat drops, blurring the skyline into watercolor gray. Employees hurried toward the elevators with umbrellas and laptops. Amanya waited. She liked rain, not for the wet, but for the way it slowed everyone down. Even the loudest people went quiet beneath umbrellas. The busiest streets softened. The world seemed to breathe differently. When it eased to a drizzle, she left. The taxi crawled home through evening traffic. Street vendors arranged roasted maize along the sidewalks. Children splashed barefoot through puddles. Women balanced baskets atop their heads without touching them. The smell of wet earth drifted through the window, and it took her, unbidden, back to childhood. Holidays in the village, running through fields before she learned that dresses should stay clean and girls should behave. Back then she had laughed loudly, climbed trees, asked endless questions, believed she could become anything. She searched for that girl now. The memory felt strangely distant, like remembering someone else's life. At home, she changed into comfortable clothes and made a simple dinner: rice, vegetables, grilled fish, eating quietly by the window while rain tapped against the glass. No television, no music, only the rhythm of the water. After the dishes, she opened the leadership email again. Still there, waiting as though opportunities had no expiration. She knew better. Her phone buzzed, a message from an old university friend. Saw the leadership opening at your company. You should definitely apply. You'd be amazing. Amanya smiled sadly and typed, ha ha ha, I don't think I'm leadership material. She stared at the sentence before sending it. Leadership material. What did that even mean? Louder? More charismatic? Less thoughtful? Less afraid? She erased it and replied simply, thank you. Nothing more. Later, she stood at the bathroom mirror. The reflection looked composed, professional, kind, capable. No one would guess how much of herself she kept hidden. No dramatic signs of unhappiness, no tears, just tired eyes. Eyes that carried years of second-guessing, years of swallowing opinions, years of choosing comfort over courage. She remembered being 8, hand raised so eagerly her shoulder ached, certain of the answer. The teacher called on someone else. Afterward, a classmate laughed. You always want attention. The words embarrassed her more than she understood at the time. The next day she raised her hand a little lower. Months later, only when she was certain. Years later, almost never. She remembered being 15, telling relatives she wanted to lead a science club, and an uncle chuckling, "You don't have to compete with boys all the time." Everyone laughed. She laughed too. It was easier that way. In university, a lecturer once praised one of her presentations. A classmate whispered afterward, "Don't make the rest of us look bad." Again she went quiet, comment by comment, smile by smile. She had called it humility, called it maturity, consideration, wisdom. Only now did another possibility surface. Maybe she had simply grown afraid of taking up space. Not all at once. Gradually, like a photograph fading under years of sunlight. She looked into her own eyes. Really looked. The apartment's silence deepened around her. Outside, the rain had stopped. Somewhere, a dog barked once, and everything went still again. Her reflection didn't accuse her. It simply waited, patiently, as if it had been waiting years for this conversation. Her voice came out softer than a whisper. "When did I become afraid of being seen?" No answer came, only silence. But for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something. A crack in a wall she'd spent years carefully building. A question that, once asked, could never be unasked. And somewhere beneath the careful routines, the polite smiles, the lowered voice, and the invisible life she had mastered, something long forgotten stirred. Small, fragile, almost imperceptible. Not confidence, not yet. Just the faintest memory of a girl who once believed her voice belonged in every room she entered. Questions have a strange way of refusing to disappear. Some dissolve as quickly as they are asked, carried away by the noise of ordinary life. Others linger like the scent of rain long after the clouds have moved on, settling quietly into the corners of the mind, returning at unexpected moments until they are answered, or until they change the person asking them. For Amanya, the question followed her everywhere. When did I become afraid of being seen? It greeted her while she brushed her teeth. It sat beside her during breakfast. It rode silently with her to work, reflected in the passing windows of shops and buses. She had expected the feeling to fade after a night's sleep. Instead, it grew heavier. Not painful, not yet, just impossible to ignore. The days that followed looked, to everyone else, exactly the same. Amanya still arrived at the office before most of her colleagues. She still greeted the receptionist with the same warm smile. She still organized her desk before opening her laptop. She still completed every assignment before its deadline. Nothing visible had changed, but inside her, something had shifted. She had begun paying attention, not to other people, but to herself. She noticed the tiny pauses she had never questioned before. Every time someone interrupted her, she stopped talking instead of continuing. Every time praise came her way, she immediately redirected it. It was a team effort. I was just helping. It wasn't a big deal. She couldn't remember the last time she had simply said, "Thank you," without apology, without explanation, without making herself smaller. It was as though someone had handed her a mirror, not for her face, but for her habits, and the reflection was unsettling. On Wednesday afternoon, the Human Resources Department organized a professional development workshop. The guest speaker was a leadership coach with silver hair, kind eyes, and a voice so calm that people leaned in rather than tuning out. He spoke about communication, influence, and confidence. Nothing he said was particularly new. Amanya had read many of the same ideas in books. But then he asked a question. "I'd like each of you to think about the first time you felt you had to hide a part of yourself." The room grew unexpectedly quiet. Pens stopped moving. Even the air conditioner seemed louder. The coach smiled gently. "No one is born believing they are too much." His words landed with surprising force. "Someone teaches us." Amanya lowered her eyes to her notebook. She had intended to take notes. Instead, she found herself writing memories. Not in order, not neatly, just fragments. Primary 3, science competition. Don't make others uncomfortable. Good girls are humble. You talk like you're older than everyone else. The list grew. Each memory seemed insignificant on its own. Together, they formed something she had never noticed before, a pattern. That evening, instead of going straight home, Amanya walked. The city was settling into dusk. Streetlights flickered awake one by one. The smell of roasted ground nuts drifted from roadside vendors, and children chased one another between narrow paths, their laughter carrying effortlessly through the cool evening air. She found herself wandering toward the neighborhood where she had grown up. It had changed. The old grocery shop was now a pharmacy. The empty field where children once played football had become a row of apartment buildings. But one thing remained exactly as she remembered: the jacaranda tree. It still stood at the edge of her former primary school, its branches stretched wide across the fading sky. Though it was not the season for blossoms, she could almost imagine the purple flowers carpeting the ground as they had years before. She rested her hand against its rough bark. A memory surfaced so vividly that it seemed less like remembering and more like stepping backward in time. She was 9 years old. The classroom buzzed with excitement. Their teacher had announced a storytelling competition, and every pupil had been invited to participate. Amanya had spent an entire week preparing. Every evening she stood before the cracked mirror in her mother's bedroom, rehearsing expressions, changing her voice for different characters, perfecting every pause. She loved stories. She loved the feeling of making people imagine things they had never seen. On the day of the competition, her hands trembled with excitement rather than fear. She stepped to the front of the classroom. She began. Within moments, the room fell silent. Even the children who rarely paid attention were listening. When she finished, there was applause. Real applause. Her teacher beamed with pride. "You have a gift," she said. Amanya floated through the rest of the day. Until lunch, a group of older pupils passed by. One of them smirked. "You think you're special now?" Another laughed. "She's always trying to be the teacher's favorite." The laughter followed her down the corridor. It echoed louder than the applause. By the next competition, she declined to participate. The memory dissolved. Amanya blinked. She was standing beneath the jacaranda tree again, the evening breeze brushing softly against her face. How strange, she thought. She had remembered the teasing for years. She had forgotten the applause. That realization unsettled her. Why had her mind preserved the criticism more carefully than the encouragement? Why had one careless remark outweighed genuine recognition? How many other moments had she rewritten without realizing it? The following Saturday, she visited her mother. The house smelled exactly as it always had. Fresh chapati, soap, furniture polish, home. Family photographs lined the hallway. Amanya in a graduation gown, Amanya receiving an academic award, Amanya smiling beside cousins during Christmas many years earlier. Her mother noticed her studying the pictures. "You've always worked hard," she said with quiet pride. Amanya smiled. "I suppose." Her mother laughed softly. "I suppose. Even now you cannot accept a compliment." The observation was so casual that it almost passed unnoticed. Almost. Instead, it caught Amanya completely off guard. "Have I always been like that?" Her mother paused before answering. "No." The single word lingered between them. "No?" "When you were little," her mother said, "you believed you could do anything." She stirred the tea absent-mindedly. "You would stand on chairs pretending to give speeches. You'd gather your cousins and assign them homework." They both smiled. "You weren't afraid of attention." The smile slowly faded from her mother's face. "But somewhere along the way—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night, after returning home, Amanya climbed onto a chair to reach the top shelf of her wardrobe. Hidden behind old notebooks was a faded cardboard box she had not opened in years. Dust coated its edges. Inside were fragments of earlier versions of herself. School certificates, old exercise books, birthday cards, letters from friends. Near the bottom lay a small blue notebook, its pages yellowed with time. Across the front, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Things I want to be." Her heart tightened. She opened it carefully. The first page contained a list: a scientist, a teacher, a writer, a leader, a person who helps people. She smiled, then turned another page. Every few months, her younger self had added something new. Speak in front of many people. Start a club. Travel the world. Build something important. There was no hesitation, no apology, no doubt, only possibility. She continued reading until one folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages. It was a school report. At the bottom, beneath grades and attendance, a teacher had written, Amanya possesses exceptional leadership potential. She should be encouraged to take on more visible responsibilities. She stared at the sentence for a very long time. Encouraged, not discouraged. Encouraged. She couldn't remember anyone ever showing her those words. Had they been overlooked? Had they simply been forgotten? Or had they been buried beneath louder voices telling her not to outshine others? She closed the notebook gently. Tears threatened, but none came. Instead, she felt something far more uncomfortable. Grief, not for a person, for a version of herself, for the fearless little girl who believed leadership was as natural as breathing, for the teenager who slowly exchanged confidence for acceptance, for the young woman who mistook silence for humility. How many decisions had been shaped by beliefs that were never truly hers? How many opportunities had she surrendered before anyone else had the chance to reject her? The questions multiplied, each one peeling away another layer of certainty. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, tapping softly against her window. Inside, the apartment felt different. Not because anything had changed. The books remained neatly arranged. The peace lily still leaned toward the moonlight. The dishes were washed. Everything appeared exactly where it belonged. Everything except Amanya. For the first time in years, she felt like a stranger inside the carefully constructed life she had built. She walked to the window and looked out across the sleeping city. Thousands of lights shimmered in the darkness. Behind every illuminated window was another story. Another person carrying invisible fears. Another life shaped by words spoken long ago. She wondered how many of them had also become smaller without noticing. How many brilliant people had mistaken self-erasure for kindness. How many dreams had been abandoned because someone, somewhere, had laughed at the wrong moment. Her gaze drifted upward. The clouds had cleared. A scattering of stars emerged, quiet but unmistakable against the night sky. They did not compete with one another. None apologized for shining. None dimmed itself so another could be seen. The thought settled gently into her heart. Perhaps that was never how light was meant to work. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A calendar reminder appeared on the screen. Leadership applications close in 10 days. She looked at it for several seconds. Her pulse quickened. This time, she did not dismiss the notification. She did not close it. She simply let it remain on the screen, waiting, like an unopened door. For the first time, the fear inside her met something unexpected. Not confidence, not certainty, but curiosity. And curiosity, she would soon discover, is often the first quiet step toward courage.